Well, good afternoon, Dr. Kremens here. It's Friday, the 17th at about 2:30 or so, a little after 2:30. I just posted the grades for paper number one. So if you haven't had a chance to take a look yet, or if you're waiting to see your comments, those are all set. So all the comments I've put on the papers, so you'll see, as I mentioned in class, all the comments in the margins of the paper, as well as a summary at the end with the grade. And I've posted those grades on Blackboard. So I want to talk a little bit about those papers, especially since, again, I won't see you this coming Monday because of the holiday. So what I normally would do in class, I'll do briefly in this video. And then I also want to talk a little bit about using quotations and sources correctly and appropriately for paper number two, since that's a major focus, as we talked about in Monday's class for this week. So we'll do, and some of the things I have to discuss are kind of connected. So we'll do a little bit of that in this video. So hopefully the points that I'll make will help you as you're working on paper number two. But please keep in mind, as I've said before, if you have any questions, either on the comments and the grade that I put on paper number one, or if you have any questions as you're working on paper number two, please let me know. I'm happy to meet with you, over Zoom, or I'll be answering questions over email. As I said this past week, I typically try to stay away from my work emails on Saturdays. But if you do email me on Saturday with questions, I'll be right back online on Sunday. And I'll also plan to check my email on Monday, even on the holiday, just to, make sure everyone is okay if you have any questions. So let me talk a little bit about paper number one. First of all, I'd like to thank a lot of you did very, very well on it. You were very descriptive, very detailed in responding not only to Mike Rose and his ideas about work and the skills needed at different kinds of jobs, but also in describing the work that you're doing. So or jobs that you've had. So you'll notice when you read through your paper, I'll try to point out not just things that I think need to be changed, but also things that I think are working particularly well in the paper. And so you'll see that as you go through. Although, again, if you have any trouble seeing the comments or have any questions on them, please let me know. Now, unfortunately, and this is something that I was going to talk about regardless, but I was disappointed to find in this first batch of papers that I had multiple instances of plagiarism. And this is something we talked about on the first day of class. And it's something that I want to address also in this video because it's a really serious issue. If on the first paper, you were using outside sources and not citing them and simply copying them or cutting and pasting portions of material from websites into your paper, that's plagiarism. It's cheating. And we've talked about this in class. It's mentioned on the syllabus. Any use of material that's not your own, it's not cited. And again, citing something, even if you're not citing it correctly, is one thing, but if you're not citing it at all and you're cutting and pasting material from other sources to fill out your paper or to finish it more quickly, that will result not only in an F for the paper, but potentially in an F for the class. It's not possible to pass this class by plagiarizing the papers. And as you probably have noticed, I try to read the papers as carefully as I can, as soon as I can, also, so that you get the feedback, and you're going to find that going forward. Because I take the job seriously, and as I've said, I enjoy my work as a teacher. And unfortunately, sometimes there's instances like this where I have to touch on issues such as this, where again, using outside sources without citing them is inappropriate. It goes against also the whole focus of the class, especially with paper number one, which is a narrative paper. I really want your stories. I'm not interested in stuff that's just copied from other material. And as I've also mentioned in class, I'm interested in reading your voice, not the voice of something else that maybe you encountered online. So one of the issues is that if you're rushing through papers, if you're really not prioritizing the class and just sort of trying to get through it, it's simply not going to happen. So you really need to do the work on your own. And you also need to do the writing on your own. As I've mentioned, it's one thing to write a paper that maybe isn't your best, but it's your work and you can revise it later on. But if you're plagiarizing material just to get it done quickly and to get out of the class, it's simply, it's not a good way to go, particularly because, again, we have plagiarizing checkers within Blackboard, so I can send papers through through that. And oftentimes what happens is, as I'm reading a paper, I can tell when the style changes. So I might be reading part of it that is in one style and then suddenly it shifts or it goes off topic. This is another issue when people plagiarize, is that it doesn't actually answer the question. So they'll student will get material from an online source that really has nothing to do with the paper topic, particularly a more narrative based one like this, and then tries to insert that material. Again, I'm not sure why, if that's, again, to get the paper done more quickly or just in the assumption that the teacher won't read it and just sort of pass it through because it hits the basic requirements. But that's not something you should be doing in this class. And it's also, again, it's inappropriate. It goes against not only Harper College policies, but my English department's policies and my own class policies. Again, those are issues to consider, especially with paper number 2. The work you're doing in the class should be your original work. You shouldn't be using any other outside sources other than what I've already assigned to you. Now, later in the class, we will have an assignment where you'll be able to look up some additional sources through our library database, and you'll have more flexibility. But for these first 3-4 papers, the only sources you should be using and quoting from are the ones that are the assigned readings from class, not material that you've found online. So what else can I say about that? If your first instinct when working on an assignment for class is to go online and to look up material on the topic or to try to find material to copy, don't do it. Just stop and sit down and write an outline for your paper. Or if you are struggling, if you're having writing anxiety, then reach out to me and I'm happy to help. As I've said before, I'm happy to meet over Zoom. I'm very happy to read drafts and provide feedback. But I'm not so happy when I have to track down plagiarism and I've got to look up where these sources came from, because the other thing you have to keep in mind is when a student does that, it takes time away from other students in the class, because I try to devote as much time as I can to each paper in giving comments and feedback that I hope is constructive and helpful for the next paper. So if I have to track down plagiarism and stuff that's been copied from other sources, that does take time away from other students in the class as well, because I have to spend my time and energy on that rather than just responding to the papers that have been given to me. So long story short, don't plagiarize, don't copy stuff, don't try to go online and cut and paste or splice things into your paper, because it's very easy to find, and it's not going to result in a passing grade for the paper. And that's particularly important to kind of move into how this fits in with paper number 2 for the second assignment. So let me do my screen share here and talk a little bit about the assignment for this week. Now that you've got my feedback from paper number 1, remember paper number 2, and I'm going to focus, as I mentioned in my video from a couple of days ago, particularly on the use of sources. And so again, this is sort of a practice run for this paper, and it's easy to cite in the format that we're using. Sorry, it took me a while to kind of think through that idea. So we're using what's called MLA, or Modern Language Association format. It's pretty straightforward, pretty simple. We talked again about it a little bit in class the other night. And you'll notice at the end of my papers, well, 2 things actually. If you notice at the beginning of the directions, I always mention, do not use any other sources other than, in this case, those by Susan Sontag, Sally Mann, or Kim Fontai for this paper. Those are your sources. So for this one, you shouldn't be using any additional sources. You shouldn't even be looking anything up on any of these writers, because much like paper number 1, this is still a very opinion-driven assignment. So I want to get your thoughts on these readings. So the first step in doing a paper like this, after reading the directions over, after it's assigned, is do the readings. And these readings are all fairly short. The quiz for this week also is designed to sort of help you work through the major ideas. But you really want to get into that schedule, especially now that we're heading into the 3rd week of the class. It's a quickly moving class. We do a paper a week. So you really want to get into the habit of, after Monday, again, this Monday we have a holiday, but I will post additional videos at the start of the week to sort of supplement that holiday. You want to do the reading first. So get on that schedule by Thursday, Friday at the latest. You want to get those readings done and look at the directions so that you can be working on your paper as well. Don't leave these assignments till the day before, till the day of, because that's sometimes also where plagiarism becomes a problem. Not in all cases, but in a lot of cases, people are rushing at the last moment. They put it off, and then just to kind of quickly get it out of the way, rather than even asking for extra help or even extra time, people will copy stuff. And that's not a good option, as I keep saying. And that's why you'll notice in all my directions, I always mention that any use of those uncited sources is plagiarism and will result in that for the paper. That's particularly the case with this one. But again, you've got the sources in front of you, and they're short. None of these essays is particularly long. I think the longest is the Sally Man, and even that one's only about 5 pages long. So the readings are also designed to be accessible and short enough that you can kind of get through them with everything else you have going on in your life. So with that said, since those are our potential sources for these particular topics for the paper, remember that at the end of all the directions, I always put in a review of this kind of citation format. So remember, when you're using a source, you have to cite it. You have to show where you got the information from. That's part of any college class, not just an English class. You want to acknowledge where this material come from. You can't just copy it and then cut and paste it into the paper and then suggest that those are your ideas or your writing. So in this case, as I mentioned in the video from a couple of days ago, you'll notice that I have a sample paragraph. And this would be the kind of sample paragraph, it's on the shorter end of things, I think, but it's the kind of sample paragraph that you would include in the first half of paper number 2, because that's where you're briefly summarizing and responding to ideas from the reading. So in this case, here's an example from the Susan Sontag essay. It says, in her essay on photography, Sontag begins with a discussion of what she describes as the magical quality of images. Although she wrote this essay in the 1970s, many of the points she makes are still relevant today in the age of digital cameras and smartphones. So you'll notice as a sample paragraph, there's always a buildup to the quotation, a couple of sentences that sort of flow with the rest of the paper, kind of introduce ideas to the reader. And then generally you want to embed your quotations in the middle of these kinds of paragraphs, because that way the reader has some kind of indication of what the context is, like what it is you're writing about, who this writer is, where their ideas are coming from. So it's like you're in conversation with them. So you're acknowledging this work, you're acknowledging this other reading that you did. You're also authorizing yourself, because you're showing the reader that you've done this reading and that you can then talk about it in your own words. And you don't have to have it, not everything has to be perfect. You don't have to write a dissertation on the quotation, some kind of long study of it, but you want to be able to respond to it. And this will be the case also in other classes where you're asked to write longer research papers, not just in English 102, for example, but in any of your other courses. So in the middle of this paragraph, you'll see next what the writer does is they say, according to Sontag, photographs are perhaps the most mysterious of all the objects that make up and thicken the environment we recognize as modern. And then after that, there's the citation. So again, as we talked in class on Monday, if it's an online electronic source, you only need the last name of the author, because those typically don't have page numbers. They're made to be, so you can scroll through them on your tablet or your e-reader or your computer or whatever, or your phone, whatever you're reading it on. So they're typically not going to have page numbers. Now, in the case of something that has a page number, like the Susan Sontag essay, the Sally Mann essay is from I scanned that from her recent autobiography. Those would require page numbers. So in this case, it's Sontag page 10. We know where that comes from. That also allows the reader to look up that material. The other reason we use citations is not just to show that we're not plagiarizing something, although that's significant, but we also use citations in order to indicate where the reader could find this information for themselves. That's especially the case with longer research papers, because we write those assuming that someone would want to look up that information if we've done research on a topic. Now, the other thing you want to do when you're quoting something like this, and you're going to be doing that, as I mentioned in the outline for this paper, in the first half of paper number 2, those first 2 body paragraphs should have your 2 quotations. So you introduce them, you kind of summarize them in your own words, and I want to stress in your own words. So I don't want another person's interpretation of it. I want your interpretation of it. And if you're struggling in coming up with an interpretation for a quotation from your source, let me know. And again, I'm happy to help. But you always want to have a couple of sentences after the quotation where you explain it in more detail. So here, what the writer did is they said, here, Sontag suggests that our current society is filled with so many images that the atmosphere, she says, is thick. There's even another quotation there. Well, there may not be a way to escape from all this media, especially in the digital age we live in now. Sontag suggests that we might be able to analyze more carefully the world we live in by understanding the history of these images. So again, that's a sort of basic example. Your paragraphs can obviously be longer than that, but that's your basic format. Give some context on the quotation, quote it, and put the citation in so the reader knows where to find it. And then add in 2 or 3, maybe 4 sentences of your own to explain it, to make connections to it, to say what you relate to in it. That's what you want to do in the first half of this paper, so that in the second half, then you can get into your analysis of the photograph you've selected, or if in the case of topic number 4, your opinion on Fontaine's essay or Sontag's essay. So everything I just mentioned is summarized here, introducing the quotation in these kinds of paragraphs, briefly explaining them, citing them in this correct format. And then remember, you also need to works cited at the end of the paper. And as I mentioned, I think maybe briefly in the other video as well, I've given you all the possible topics for this, but unlike the last paper, this is not the works cited that all of you would use, because some of you are only going to be using one of these sources. Some of you might be, the most you would really use for these would be 2 of them if you're doing topic number 4, if you're using the Fantai essay and also the Susan Sontag essay. So that's your works cited. So again, that section of the directions is there to help you, to kind of give you a reminder of how to do the citations, to encourage you to do them. It's also kind of like a checklist for when you're finishing up the paper to remind yourself of how to do this. And so I hope that that's useful. And all of the papers that we do for class not only will require sources, especially as we go forward here with papers 3, 4, and 5 into the rest of the semester, but also particularly with this one, because this is even though we use some of Mike Rose in paper number 1, in the final paragraph, again, there was that requirement to use a quotation from Rose at the end of paper number 1. This one, you're using more of it. It's really more of a traditional kind of academic college paper. Okay, so you want to make sure you're citing your sources. So let me stop that screen share. Again, I just wanted to give you that reminder of those basics for these citation formats, just to kind of sum these things up. So when you're citing something, when you're citing a quotation from a source, remember, in the paragraph where you're quoting that source, introduce the quotation in your own words, give me as the reader some context, give me a little bit of your opinion on it, quote it, cite it. Again, if it's a print source, if it's from a book source, it's the last name of the author and the page number. If it's an online source with no page numbers, you just need the last name of the author in that little parentheses, which tells the reader where they can find the information. And you need the works cited at the end. And let me stress again, please avoid plagiarism. Do not plagiarize. Again, it's not possible to pass English 101 by copying other sources. That doesn't give you the opportunity to develop your voice as a writer. It doesn't give me the opportunity to really give you valuable feedback on your writing, which is my goal and my job and my vocation, I guess. We'll use that old terminology. So if you do have any questions for me at all on paper number 2, please let me know. If you have any questions on paper number 1, also let me know, and I'm happy to help. Now, I hope you also have a good weekend. Again, because we don't have class on Monday because of the holiday, you'll notice next week there'll be more of these videos, because next week, as I had sort of mentioned in our last class, is going to be more asynchronous since we've got the holiday, which will be the same as the week we have July 4th. But the class is still going on. So that means I'm here to help. I'm here to give you the support that you need. So please reach out to me, and I'm happy to talk with you. Like I said, Saturdays, I take a little bit of a break from work and from school stuff, but I'll be back online on Sunday, and I'll be very happy to help and answer any questions that you have, either about paper number 1 or about paper number 2. And most of all, I'm looking forward to reading these next papers, and I'm looking forward to reading your work, to you reading your opinions and your ideas, because that's what I enjoy about this process, and that's what I've enjoyed in my career to this point as a teacher. But in the meantime, like I said, please have a wonderful and a safe weekend. Reach out if you have any questions, and next video will be up by later in the day on Monday. Okay, so take a look for that when you get a chance, and let me know if you have any questions on paper number 2 as you're working on it. Talk to you later, and again, have a nice weekend.